when I was a money launderer, I was tripping over people who were in the financial service business, the banking business, the legal business, who were offering their services to help me to launder money.
That voice belongs to Robert Mazur. For nearly 3 decades, he served as a federal special agent for several US agencies. But his most dangerous missions were the years he spent undercover infiltrating 2 powerful Colombian drug cartels. Posing as the mob's money launderer, Robert developed a deep understanding of how illicit money flows across the world and saw up close how financial institutions enable dirty money to enter financial systems. This is BCG on Compliance, a podcast that explores today's most pressing criminal trends and how compliance professionals are adapting to stay ahead of that curve. I'm Hanyo Seibert. Robert's unbelievable experience deep undercover with drug cartels has been chronicled in 2 books and a Hollywood film. Today, he works in the private sector, consulting with compliance and risk experts, sharing various methods of money laundering, and shining a light on the gaps in the system. Not everyone will relate to the glamour of deep undercover work, but Robert's insight into the significant change compliance professionals can make every day is invaluable. So Robert, you did 5 years undercover in incredibly dangerous circumstances and situations. Can you just start with what, in your view, was the worst or the most vivid moment of those experiences?
Wow. Probably for me, the most vivid was the one that brought me closest to being killed. I was a money launderer in the first operation, I infiltrated the highest levels of Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel. And in the second one, it was the Cali cartel and some people who were quite close to the leader of that cartel. Unfortunately, I was compromised by a fellow agent who, unbeknownst to me, had for years been on the take, and he outed me to the leadership of the cartel. And later, through witness interviews, we learned that when I met with this particular money launderer in Panama, he had a hit squad outside and had told them that if he didn't return within 30 minutes, that they should come in and kill everybody in the room but him. These people were heavily armed, AK-47s, and they were 3 minutes from getting into my office when he ended the meeting and left. I was wondering why he left so abruptly, and now I know.
Robert's story is incredible. And it's important to remember that while he was undercover, he wasn't just dealing with criminals. He was dealing with finance professionals too. I want to know what he learned about money laundering from talking to people in financial institutions.
With respect to the money launderer side, it would be with the now defunct Bank of Credit and Commerce International. I had a social meeting with one of the officers. He explained to me that he felt as though that the U.S. efforts in the war on drugs and the war on money laundering were hypocritical because, as he explained, and this is an important thing for all of us to recognize and an important thing for people within compliance to try to push in my view, what he pointed out to me was that the members of the Federal Reserve, most central banks throughout the world and major institutions, they repatriate their cash back to the United States on a regular basis. And what he said was, this is odd. Right now, the central bank in Colombia accepts cash anonymously through its sinister window. And this is something that's public. It's on the internet. And Colombians at the time were not allowed to have US dollar accounts, but people were bringing in millions and millions of dollars. The reason that was happening goes back to economics. The central bank was holding pesos, and at that time it was a 28% per year inflationary rate. So you as a bank don't want to be holding currency that suffers inflation by 28%. So they were doing what they could do to get rid of that, but they had to get rid of the cash after they had it. And as he said to me, isn't it ironic that they take this cash, they put it on pallets, and every month they're sending $100 million or more in U.S. currency to the Federal Reserve. And don't you think that there's someone at the Federal Reserve with enough wisdom to recognize that a country that does not allow its citizens to maintain U.S. dollar accounts is repatriating U.S. currency? And how could that possibly be? And that really brought me to write an article suggesting to central banks and to governments that they consider to reverse audit the repatriation of cash. By that, I mean, if the Federal Reserve looked to see which institutions are repatriating the majority of the cash in a given month, they would be able to in turn deal with that institution. So remember, cash is king. And if you follow that reverse audit, I think we would be doing the world a favor in identifying who's taking the hot money. And it's something I think we should be doing on a regular basis.
Wow, there's so much I actually would want to explore on your undercover time, but shifting gears a bit, and you said cash is king. If you think about the criminal mindset, to understand professional criminals, what are some key takeaways that anti-financial crime experts should have or should take along with them?
We need to be looking at some very fundamental things. What is the geographic area at which the account holder operates? What type of business are they running? What type of product do they sell? And what is the pattern of the transactions that are in the normal course of business for that account? And most of these patterns actually come about because of capital restrictions imposed by governments. Let's take, for example, some recent things that have been established for anybody that lives within the People's Republic of China. You are not allowed to personally invest more than $50,000 a year outside the borders of your country. Well, you know what? There are a lot of people who want to do more. There are certain types of businesses that carry risk more than others, and certainly patterns of transaction, especially if they involve cross-border. Cross-border is definitely something that should be added to the red flags. And your identification of this really needs to come about as a result of a quality onboarding resource. You need to have subject matter experts leading this, but you also have to have identifiers of red flags that come from genuine algorithms that are drawn from real subject experts. So we definitely need to identify risk, identify the account relationships that have the greatest risk, know what fundamentals we should look at in order to see that, lean on quality onboarding AI to help you to get there, and really dig in. I hate to say this, but the bottom line is it all boils down to hard work. Having all of this knowledge and trying to do these things are great, but you've got to put the rubber to the road, and you really need to put the time in to analyze the biggest risk that your institution carries.
Couldn't agree more. What are some of the money laundering techniques or like a special case that really surprised you?
I hate to say this, but when I was a money launderer, I was tripping over people who were in the financial service business, the banking business, the legal business, who were offering their services to help me to launder money, to set up methodologies to launder money. And probably the most sophisticated one that was put together for me was put together by a broker-dealer in Panama who was working closely with a major accounting firm that brought in a lawyer who had a basis in, had offices in London and in BVI, and sold me a group of Liechtenstein Foundation, BVI corporations, Panamanian corporations, all collectively that were used to set up what from the outside looked like a European-based mutual fund. I think that it would have been virtually impossible for any person who did not know to suspect that that mutual fund was in fact a money laundering mechanism. Generally speaking, when there is a requirement to show who the beneficial owner is of funds being held in accounts, there was a great comeback that was established, which is there are literally dozens upon dozens of people with beneficial ownership, and it would be a violation of our fiduciary responsibility to them to disclose their names. We are a mutual fund. And so they were not prepared to disclose and would not disclose who the beneficial owners were, when in fact the beneficial owners were drug traffickers who were using this mutual fund to establish interests in lending institutions that in turn built the things that they wanted, skyscrapers in Panama and other things.
Wow. And Normally, I would say, oh, I would ask, does this still happen? But with some of the banks being fined, I think the answer is very clearly yes. And a lot of the scenarios you describe are not scenarios of legacy times, but really something we see even today in this day and age.
Yes, and you would think that we would learn from other people's mistakes, but there were a sequence. In one given year, a particular institution wound up having to plead guilty to intentionally failing to maintain an anti-money laundering compliance program because of their banking a substantial number of casas de cambio, houses of exchange, in a particular country. They, after they did that, sold that business, and there was another bank right there ready to take it. That bank took it, and several years later, they wound up pleading guilty to intentionally failing to maintain an anti-money laundering program with respect to those same accounts. So then they sold that business, and then another institution wound up buying it and became rather well known for having to pay a $1.9 billion fine for that type of thing. But, you would think that we would learn from others' mistakes. But unfortunately, because of the fact that this is such a lucrative area, it's something that unfortunately continues to happen. And if I worked in a financial institution in the compliance world, one of the things that I think I could do that would be most important for the management of the institution would be for me to facilitate, with their help, the embracing of compliance goals by those who are on the sales side. I have found that those banks that wind up getting themselves in trouble suffer from what I call dual brain syndrome, two brains. The sales side is motivated by profit. The compliance side is motivated by efficiently executing compliance. And it's very, very difficult to instill within the people on the sales side a vigorous embracing of compliance when, by outing one of their accounts and saying, guys, I think we really should be looking more closely into this, because when this account came on, it looked better, but I'm noticing this transition in the format of their business model, and it's taking on more risk. And I think compliance should take a harder look at this. And they take a harder look and they say, yeah, we've got to close this account. Well, the person on the sales side just lost a pretty good number because they were making decent money based upon the deposits that were coming in. It's up to management to come up with some type of financial incentive for people on the sales side to do that. Come up with some type of reward for that person on the sales side to lessen the pain for having put the bank before their personal profits. And we might see a little bit more of a molding of the two brains into one. I do speaking engagements at conferences all the time. 99.9% of the time, I'm talking to the choir because I'm talking to people in compliance. Let's bring the sales side in some more. Let's educate them some more on the things that compliance people need to know. Let's make it a team. Let's not make it a situation where we have one group of people who are marching to a different song than the other side of the bank.
What do you think is most misunderstood about the way that criminals operate?
Well, to be a very good money launderer, you can't look, smell, walk, talk like a money launderer. You have to be within the camouflage of legitimate business. And so as you assess a high-risk relationship, just because the person, from what you've received, from their resume, from their 3 bank references, from their 3 business references, from the looks of the accounts, just because all of that looks normal does not mean by any means that they are not involved in money laundering. It's going to take the hard work because you know what? It's going to be in the data. If you get past all that other stuff and you actually drill down into the nature of the transactions that are occurring, the data is going to tell you whether or not this risk is real or this risk is not to be something of concern. And that really goes for any business, because And I can tell you that, but going back to the story I told you in the beginning about almost being killed as a result of corruption within my own department, we sometimes, when we're close to an individual, it's almost impossible for us to believe that they could be involved in something so evil. But when you objectively took a look at that corrupt officer, if you looked at their personal finances, if you look at their phone activity, if you looked at their computer use on the sensitive law enforcement computers, it would have given away right then and there that this is what happened. And so when you use an AI system to analyze transactions, you have to understand the business that you're analyzing. You have to identify the key data. That key data needs to be extracted and organized. You need to analyze it. You need to identify the critical leads. And then you devote enhanced due diligence to that field of information and produce a report. And that is the most important thing that you can deliver to management as the argument for why risk is true or risk is not true in a given situation. The data is not going to lie. The data is going to let you know what's going on. And as long as you put in the hard work to analyze that data, you're going to be doing the right thing for your institution.
To what extent would you say that AML experts need to understand global trade? And how could understanding global trade influence or impact their day-to-day work?
I want to make sure that our listeners recognize that, at least in my book, there are two types of money launderers. There are money launderers that work for a particular institution and therefore establish fronts that are used to launder money. Those may be people like the undercover persona that I had, where I ran businesses that were prone to being abused to launder money, and I did it for a particular client, that being the Medellin cartel. And in that instance, I had an investment company, a mortgage brokerage business, a jewelry chain with 30 locations on the East Coast, an air charter service with a private jet, and even a brokerage firm with a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. All of that was used to help a particular type of money launderer to take their money, transform it, and give it back to them. But there are other very, very high-risk accounts that are involved in the black money markets. That's a different kind of money launderer because they are serving a broad array of bad guys. And so it's important for compliance of professionals to know what the black money market does and how it does it, because it exists in all parts of the world, but it's called different things in different parts of the world. In Latin America, North America, it's generally referred to as the black market peso exchange. In China, it's called flying money. But basically what it is it's an informal banking system. And what you're doing is you are buying and selling commodities of currencies. Your supply comes in the form of dollars from mostly the underworld. Your demand comes from people in the global markets who are dollar starved. So you need to know who's dollar starved. If you don't understand the economics of the world, you're going to have trouble identifying real risk.
Are there any resources where people can read up on global trade and global economics like you were describing? Because I do think it's quite a helpful background for anyone working in the AML space to have more of that global strategic background.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I hate to sound like a commercial, but you can go to my website and under the publication section, read the articles that I've written. I've written papers that have been submitted to colleges for their acceptance by peers, and I've written articles that have been published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and many other outlets. You know, there are quite a few different professional compliance associations that put out papers that offer the latest articles about issues that impact compliance, drug trafficking, money laundering, sanctions, Because we're not just talking about money laundering. We also have to be involved in PEPs. We have to be involved in watching where sanctions are. Just do some simple Googling where you put in the name of the institution and DOJ press release. Read the press release. Usually at the bottom of the press release, they're going to give you a link to the indictment. Take the time to read the indictment. There's a factual basis section within the indictment, or a manner and means, and that tells the story. Look into the press releases, the indictments, the complaints. I subscribe to PACER. That is a U.S. Government website that you can go to. You can go in there and put in the name of the case, and you can go through the docket, and you can click on the docket, and it will immediately pop up these pleadings, and you'll get the real pleadings. That's how you really get to the bottom of it. And if I was running a compliance department, if I was in charge of it, I would have one of my most trusted researchers doing that in every case, pulling those out and making sure that we distributed within our compliance department those pleadings, and ask my staff, make sure you take the time to see what caused that particular crash, because we don't want to repeat history. And they can read the pleadings and they can see it.
I mean, that's a great advice for running a compliance or anti-financial crime department. 3 more rapid questions. 1, we got to talk about technology briefly. Robert, what is your view on what are you most excited about in terms of technology or AI innovation in the space of combating financial crime?
One of the things that I have to say on this topic is, please don't forget, there is no silver bullet. We have to have policies and procedures that are established soundly, that cover the core issues, that are led by subject matter experts, and that tick all of the needs that we have in sound policies and procedures. And one of the things, and it's not very high tech, but one of the things that sometimes is not there, that I think really needs to be there, is a method by which those who are involved in the institution have the ability to make an anonymous submission. Oftentimes we have reluctance because some parts of the world do not embrace whistleblowers. Do take the time to set up truly a method by which submissions can be made anonymously, and establish an incentive for that to be done, because that simple thing could bring you an identification rather quickly of serious risk that might have otherwise been missed on the radar screen.
Great. Second out of the 3 questions, with the rise of cryptocurrency and digital assets, how and in what form, if so, do you think the financial crime landscape is changing?
There are some reasons why it's not that attractive for people who are involved in the drug trade, unless they're dealing on the dark net, because it's very, very difficult for you to be in those areas where drugs are readily sold and buy it with crypto. But it is being used by those who are controlling those businesses. And, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I would definitely, at that stage as a compliance officer, I would look for it, and I happen to personally know a group that is involved in doing nothing other than providing assistance to governments and major institutions on analyzing accounts that are involved in high volume cryptocurrency. It's getting bigger and bigger all the time. But I tell you, the reason that it's not very attractive is because blockchain technology is exactly that. It's traceable. And yeah, I know you start using tumblers and you feel as though, or at least you've been led to believe, it's not traceable. But I know this one particular vendor that is responsible for helping the IRS to identify transactions that occurred through Silk Road 6 years after they occurred through Silk Road, and were able to link the person who was trying to sell Bitcoin to a Bitcoin money service business. They were able to identify that in fact was crypto generated through Silk Road, through drug transactions, and helped the IRS to seize $3 billion worth of crypto.
Last question from my end. I have to ask this. How did you sleep at night when you were working undercover? I mean, I cannot imagine doing this job. Was it very disturbing, or did you sort of live with it at the time? Like, how was your undercover life?
Well, I lived with it well because I was trained, I think, well. I was blessed with tremendous leadership that recognized that doing long-term undercover work is a science. It's not a game. And so before I was allowed to attend the undercover schools, I had to go through psychological profiling because there are certain traits that individuals have that may put them at greater risk when they are confronted with huge temptations. It is a temptation when you receive $2 million. And there are a lot of horror stories of things that officers did that caused them to not only lose their jobs, but lose their freedom. I had great, great trainers. My mentor was a gentleman by the name of Joe Pistone, who the book and the movie Donnie Brasco is based upon. He infiltrated Italian-American organized crime for 5 years. Johnny Depp played him in the movie Donnie Brasco. In these operations, there was probably, at the height of the operations, 150 or so other agents, analysts, managers, prosecutors, administrative staff, all of whom were working together in a cohesive team that was built under the principles of best team building concepts. So I had all of that to my advantage. And I also knew that if I showed fear, I was giving the bad guys a red flag. I would be my own demise. And the last thing I'll say is that I'm no individual hero in these stories. I got an opportunity to earn one of the leadership positions, but teams actually made these things happen. But I did suffer from a disease that I hope no undercover agent gets, but I got it. And I can tell you, it's called information is my heroin. And the most important thing in my life when I was working undercover, and it's a flaw, I had to get the next piece of information had to be bigger than the one before, and it had to involve more risk, or I wasn't of the opinion that I was achieving my mission. And that's not a good thing because my risks got greater and greater and greater. But could you imagine how much of a lure it was for me? I had a financial advisor at a bank who was also the financial advisor for corrupt country leaders. I was familiar with all of what they were doing because I won the confidence of my account relationship manager, who told me about all these things and ultimately told me that not only were these people banking with them and other drug traffickers, but that he was servicing the intelligence communities of the world, including my own CIA. And so I was living in another world. I heard things that people only heard about on the news. I was totally entranced by the crossroads of the power that I experienced firsthand through the Latin American divisions of the international bank that I dealt with, and later with private client divisions in other institutions that I had accounts with.
Wow, super fascinating. Robert, thank you so much for being on the show. I could listen to you for days, and I certainly will read up on some of the materials you're quoting, and we'll put some of the resources into the show notes below. So if you like to hear more about Robert or like to meet him in one of the conferences he's speaking on. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much. I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners.
Do you have the buy-in of your sales teams when it comes to compliance? Join the conversation by connecting with us on your podcast app, writing a review of the show, or emailing us at bcgoncompliance@bcg.com. Be sure to subscribe to get more insights from compliance innovators. I'm Hanya Seibert. Thanks for listening.